Hey, I'm Carly. I wanted to do something that I've wanted to do for years now, really, which is to tell my story about how I battled with binging for multiple years and then made a big change in my life that completely changed my relationship with food, with my body, and most of all, with myself. I think it's important to note first and foremost that I'm not a licensed therapist. I don't work with or treat any kind of disordered eating. I'm not a specialist. I am simply just a person that had gone through that battle myself, and I know that stories can be very powerful, and most of all, telling your story can give other people hope. So that is what I'm hoping to do with this video. And just to be crystal clear, this is not me telling you or anybody that they should do this. This is merely a video saying this is what I did. The way I want to go about this is really just to explain what I personally went through, and then after that, go into a little detail about what I didn't understand, what I didn't realize, and what I did not know during that period of my life. And then I want to jump into what I did to make massive change, and then ultimately what that led to, how I'm doing now, and then maybe at the end I might wrap up with just some tidbits. First, I think it's important to just kind of outline what binge eating is. I will say I was not officially diagnosed with binge eating disorder. However, if you look up the criteria, which you can do with a simple Google search, I met all of those criteria. In fact, I probably exceeded some of the criteria. I think it's somewhat safe to say that if I had gone in for an analysis, I probably would have been diagnosed. So this can potentially be insightful for people that don't have binge eating disorder and may struggle very mildly with it or somewhere just in that spectrum. How this all began. A lot of times when people grow up with some level of trauma, just growing up in an environment where a person doesn't necessarily have control over their environment, it's very common for people to find that food and exercise is something that can easily become something that allows a person to feel control. I did grow up in an environment where there's a lot of alcoholism. I understood when this started becoming a problem. I logically knew that it was probably on some level coming down to me trying to control something in my life. Back in 2012, I had done my first ever fitness program, which was P90X. For anybody that recognizes that, it's a really intense 90-day program. I did all 90 days and I was super proud about that. And when the company had then put out P90X3, I wanted to challenge myself to also follow the nutrition plan. They had a very cut out, black and white, restrictive diet plan. I wanted the challenge, so I went ahead and started dieting for the first time in my life. Around the same time, I was also bartending at like a banquet bartending type of gig. Monday through Friday, I was super compliant to this very restrictive meal plan. It didn't take very long into starting that first diet ever that I started noticing that when I was at this bartending gig, if I had even just as much of like a cracker that was laying on a food tray, it was like this switch in my brain would go off that says, oh, well, you've already gone off plan. You've messed up the day. You might as well just go haywire and have whatever you want because tomorrow you have to be perfect on your plan again. It was kind of the internal dialogue that was happening on a very regular basis. It was very black and white. It was very perfectionistic. I didn't realize it at the time. I started to get into this pattern where the work week was really great, and then I would be anticipating going to my bartending gig, and I would swear to myself that this time was going to be different. I was going to get through the shift without touching any of the food there, And that was just a failure over and over and over again, to the point where I was really dreading having that gig at all, because I saw it as this obstacle that I could just not get through. I could not make it a full week of being compliant to this meal plan. It started to accelerate and get worse and worse. I remember even going so far as to lie to my coworkers, giving them reasons why I needed to run into the back, maybe to get more bottles of wine, or, whatever it is that we needed behind the bar. What I was really doing was I was making an excuse so that in secret I could go into the back. I would wait until I knew that one of the weddings that was going on, I could tell when they were done cutting wedding cake, and I always knew that the leftover wedding slices would get wheeled into the big walk-in refrigerator. I would time it so that if I could go into the walk-in fridge, I would just eat copious amounts of wedding cake. And that was really just the start of it. Feeling very, very ashamed and embarrassed. After that, it was like, well, anything goes. And I would go around and go out of my way through the hallways, and I would find like trays of the little petit fours and anything that was like a treat, or anything that was considered bad or off limits on my restrictive meal plan, as kind of an attempt to get it all in now, because tomorrow you have to be perfect again. It didn't just stop at weekends. Over the course of a 5-year span that this was really happening, there were periods of time where I would be very dialed in to a meal plan. One of the times was a competition prep that I did. Another time was tracking macros, experimenting on myself. Really successful periods of time where I could really be compliant to a plan, but it would always backfire, and the binging would come right back. So sometimes it would be a period of months, sometimes many months, where the binging was going on a daily basis. I could not get through the day without binging. It absolutely destroyed my confidence in myself, my relationship with myself. I was internalizing it and carrying around like just such immense shame and embarrassment, thinking that something was wrong with me, something that was really like a problem with me. Going back to the time where I started to prep for competition, I was actively battling with binging pretty bad, and my weight was at the highest I think it had been up to that point that I started prep. It was a 10-week, absolutely grueling, horrible prep. I lost about 18 pounds in 10 weeks. Very, very restrictive meal plan. I was working at the Culinary Institute of America, surrounded by like gourmet food. For the 10 weeks, I had to bring all of my food. I couldn't have a bite off of my plan, and I felt very, very imprisoned. As my competition got closer, like the week before, I was already planning. I was looking up online donut shops in the area. I was going to be competing in West Palm Beach. I was looking for like food in the area that I could go to right after the competition. I had stocked up on so many like diet treat foods like Lenny and Larry's cookies, Quest bars, things that I had not been allowed to have while I was dieting for my competition. And I did this with 100% intention of straight up binging right after the show. I didn't actually get back on stage after the initial prejudging. I didn't get back on stage to do the show. As soon as prejudging was done, I went back to, the locker room in the back, and I proceeded to eat almost an entire sleeve of rice cakes with peanut butter and almond butter, and I literally passed out. Just like that, the binging was back full-fledged. The amount of shame and guilt and embarrassment was far worse than it had ever been. Here I was, having just accomplished this dream of having the best physique yet to date, and exemplifying this extreme dedication and discipline, and then all of a sudden it was just stripped from me. In a matter of 3 to 4 months post-show, I had gained all the weight back and then some. which statistically aligns the vast majority of people that lose a good amount of weight, especially if it's aggressive or restrictive. Statistically, people put that weight back on and then more. I moved down to Florida and I was working at a couple different meal prep companies. This is when things really got pretty bad. It started to get really, really dark in my life. From the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed, I spent every waking moment thinking about food, when I was going to eat, what I was going to eat. While I was eating, I thought about what I was going to eat next and when that would be. It was all consuming. I remember looking up any kind of material that I could find. I looked up articles, I watched YouTube videos, I read or listened to audiobooks like Brain Over Binge or Never Binge Again. Nothing was helping. I felt utterly helpless. I wanted so desperately to understand why I couldn't get my shit together. I wanted to know what was wrong with me. I wanted to know how to make it stop. I remember thinking that I could have sworn that I was like under a spell. It really felt so powerless. It felt like being imprisoned in my own head and with no way out. I remember driving one morning to my workplace at the time, and I was driving and I just thought to myself, the amount of despair, I can't even put like words to it. I said to myself, if I have to live for the rest of my life, if I have to live the rest of my life like this, I don't want to do it. It can be it can be a little bit emotional for me because when I look back on that time of my life, it just makes me like sad to know that like I was in so much pain that was completely unnecessary. It did not have to be like that. That kept going for a very long time. I remember when I was working at that meal prep company, they needed some additional items from the grocery store and they needed it quickly, so they sent me to the grocery store with a company card. I was obsessing all day about staying on my meal plan. I went to the store and I bought 4 Lenny and Larry's cookies and I proceeded to eat all of them on the ride back to work so that nobody could see that I ate them. Every night that I got home from work, and then it was like clockwork in the evening, I would obsess about the food that was in the kitchen. I knew it was there, and I kept telling myself, don't do it, don't do it. This is every single night. I would sit there and promise myself that I wasn't going to binge. Inevitably, I would go into the kitchen and I would start maybe with something like rice cakes and nut butter. Then I would move on to having multiple packets of Pop-Tarts, and then from there I'd have multiple protein bars, and it just kept going. I never ate to the point where I like got sick. That was nothing that I ever did. But I would way past the point of satiety, way past that, definitely overly full and really feeling uncomfortable. I would often cry myself to sleep. And then when I woke up in the morning, there was an overwhelming sense of despair, self-criticism, self-hatred, confusion, and just desperation, really. This would be a nightly thing for months at a time, a daily battle from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. And then there would be interspersed periods of like a successful dieting phase. Through all of this, I think it was easy to kind of fly under the radar. I was always weightlifting very intensely, very heavy. And so even though I was inadvertently in a calorie surplus because I was binging, I was able to slap on a lot of muscle. And then when I would successfully go through like dieting phases, it really exposed the muscle that I had built, leading to a really pretty great physique, at least I thought so. And so I was able to kind of uphold this kind of identity of like a muscular girl that works out. She works at meal prep companies. She's within like the dieting, nutrition realm. Even though I was an open book, I would talk openly with people, sometimes even in public spaces, about the battle that I was dealing with. But I wasn't really talking openly on a regular basis about the day-to-day battle and, you know, how that was really affecting me. Back then, I think I was pretty good about documenting on Instagram, like the good and the bad and the ugly, but really not to the full extent. That was the darkest time of my life. The amount of confidence and self-trust, I mean, it was just totally stripped. I felt like I had no willpower. I felt like I was out of control. I felt imprisoned. I felt like I was always dealing with like this kind of food jail. I just did not feel free whatsoever. I remember clearly saying, like, I just want to be human again. I just want to be a person that eats food. I just want my life back. I just want to not think about this all the time. So, what I didn't understand during this period of my life, there was a level of just knowledge and education that I didn't yet have. And there were just things that I didn't realize. And if I could give myself all of that knowledge and understanding that I have now and just plop it in my head back then, I probably would have saved myself years of grief. I was internalizing something as being my fault and a defective quality of mine, and really blaming myself for something that was not warranted. What I failed to recognize is that restriction can cause disordered eating. If you consistently are telling your body and your mind through consistent exposure to restriction, there's a level of the body and mind being threatened by that. Even if you're taking a very flexible approach to dieting, if we are consistently exposed to restriction, we are kind of sending the message to our brain and our body that food is limited, it's scarce, we only get so much, we're only allowed so much, you can't have all you want, you can't have everything that you want, when you want it, however much you want. There's restrictions there. And even though we might logically understand that and be able to look at it rationally, the brain and the body are interpreting that as a threat, and our body and our mind are built and designed to keep us safe. All of the internalizing that I was doing, thinking that there must be something wrong with me, I can't get my shit together, that was unwarranted because my brain and my body were doing exactly what it was designed to do. So it makes sense that I would be inclined to overeat or binge when you feel like you're finally getting some of your freedom back. Every time that I would binge, there was a degree of freedom in that. I felt very much like I'm breaking free of the chains. I'm claiming my autonomy back, but then followed by extreme guilt and shame and all these detrimental feelings. If I look back, if I had been able to tell myself that the way my behavior was actually the right thing, it was the right response, then I would have been able to meet myself with more understanding, more compassion, more grace. The other thing I didn't understand at the time was that the more I would try to restrict, the more of a boomerang effect it would have. The more I would try to control, and the more I would try to double down my efforts, and the more I would try to get it right and be perfect, the more it would backfire. The more I tried to restrict and focus on what I didn't want to do, the more I would get just that. Like Tony Robbins says, you get what you focus on. The more that I restricted, the more allure these certain foods had, the more I wanted them. That's natural. That's a natural response by the brain and the body. So fast forward to how things changed for me. What did I change and how did that even happen? When I moved down to Florida at the very end of 2019, I started dating my current boyfriend, Chris. Chris and I had been friends for a few years prior to dating. He worked with me at the couple meal prep company, and he saw during that time, he saw how I was with food and with weight training. He understood that it had been more of a detriment than a benefit. And he said to me, because I was thinking about getting back to like tracking my food and dieting again, I was my heaviest I had ever been. I weighed 160 pounds. He said to me, Carly, you need to chill out. And my response to that was like, what do you mean chill out? And he said, you've already proven to yourself and to everyone else what you're capable of. You've gotten on stage with a great physique, like you've proven yourself over and over and over again. You already know how to eat. You do not need to go back to dieting. You know what you're doing. Just chill out. And he might not have known at that moment how much impact that would have, but ultimately what that was somebody was giving me permission to give myself permission to let go. Letting go is something that's going to look different for each person. For me, letting go meant letting go of control, letting go of the need for certainty, letting go of my identity, and letting go of really everything that was filling up all this space in my brain. This is really important. I was at the point in my journey where I was so sick and tired of going in circles. I was so sick and tired of feeling exhausted, feeling helpless. I did not want the rest of my life to look like this just circular pattern. I didn't want to think about food all the time. I just wanted my life back, and I was at the point that everybody needs to reach. You can call it hitting rock bottom, you can call it a moment of clarity. You know, as Tony Robbins says, people change when the pain of staying the same exceeds the pain of change. I was at that point. Up until that point, I was clinging to this identity that I had held for so long, which was like the fitness girl. I wanted to look a certain way, and I really tied my worth and my value to upholding that. That is why I kept going back to dieting after, binging and gaining weight. I would go back to dieting because I felt like I needed to uphold a certain level of this identity that I had created for myself. When I was at that point of just being done, it was kind of like I was waving my white flag and just saying, I surrender. So what that looked like really was I said to myself, okay, I'm not gonna restrict anymore. I'm going to ditch all the rules. I'm going to just ditch the knowledge that I've had up until now. I'm going to stop following any kind of guidelines or shoulds or need tos. I'm just going to just take all of that I've learned and held on to, and I'm going to throw it in the trash. And that is what I needed to do to absolutely start from a blank slate. What I experienced early on when I decided to let go of all food rules. I wasn't tracking my food. I wasn't following any guidelines, no plan, nothing. And all of a sudden, I was left to my own accord. There was no messing anything up. There was nothing to fail at. And since there was nothing to succeed or fail at, there was also nothing to rebel against. I kept reminding myself that there's no way to mess this up without any map ahead of me. I was literally creating what I had hoped for all along, or for so long, which was to get back to just being a human being that eats food. Since I wiped that slate clean, now I was left to use my autonomy and create a new life and a new way of eating for myself. Mainly, my compass was eating when I was hungry, and then when I'm eating, I would stop at satiety. So initially it took me, it was a little bit of practice to really kind of tune back into those normal, natural hunger and satiety cues that our bodies are designed to do. Because after dieting and restricting and binging for so long, those were being highly ignored. Without any guidelines, I decided for myself that I was going to eat when I was hungry and I was going to stop when I just felt good. No matter how much or how little food that was, no matter what kind of food it was, didn't care about protein, wasn't paying attention to fiber, didn't give two thoughts about calories or macros or anything. It was just, I'm okay, I feel hungry. What do we have in the house? Go take a look in the fridge. If nothing really looked good, wouldn't have that, and there was no additional thought to it. It was, oh, okay, well, I can have this and I'll put this and put it together, eat. Once I'm feeling satisfied, there's no reason to keep eating, literally no reason. So I would just stop. If there was leftover food, I might save it for later when I'm hungry again. If not, I would just throw it in the garbage and I wouldn't think any further about it. I was willing to let go of the control and the certainty. I was just like, don't care. And I had made a promise with myself when I was making this decision to go down this new road. If this means that as a result of letting go of this control, if this means that my body is going to blow up and betray me and I'm going to gain a bunch of weight, so be it. Because I felt that that was worth having my freedom. I was so tired and so sick of doing the same old dance that I was honestly willing to just let my body take whatever form it was going to take. I was that done. So I started to eat what I wanted, when I was hungry, and I just honored my satiety cues. I was teaching myself that food is not limited, it's not scarce. I could have however much I wanted, when I wanted, and what I wanted. There was nothing and nobody telling me that I couldn't. And having that autonomy and freedom and choice back allowed me to finally, for the first time in a really long time, make choices solely based on what I wanted and what I needed and what my body needed. And that was very, very empowering. Sorry, technical problems. In conclusion, for a happy ending, I went from stopping all the rules and restrictions and everything in January of 2020, and by November of 2020, I had really lost 20 pounds. My body settled into where it wanted to be, and I was thrilled about the fact that it took the least amount of effort that I had put in. I got my life back. I got all my brain space back to think about all these other things. I felt total freedom with food, indifference about it, very take it or leave it. I kept focusing on weight training because weight training is something that I love. I've never stopped doing that. And for the past 4 years, I've been walking around in a body and a physique that I love. I have so much more flexibility. I have so much more grace and compassion for myself. I don't get rigid. It really came as a surprise to me, a pleasant surprise, that the more I let go of trying to control, the more I actually got what I wanted. And now, for the past 4 years, I am just in a really great place, and I just have felt like I'm holding this really awesome secret, so to speak, that I would imagine that other people might benefit from, just simply from hearing my story. So I hope that this story gives you some hope, at the very least just some insight and some perspective and a little bit of knowledge into kind of what can happen when somebody chronically diets or gets kind of trapped in that binge restrict cycle. Thanks again for watching, and let me know if you have any questions or comments. You can put them right down below.